More treasures from the Hatteberg vault are dusted off and ready to roll.
And here's a preview.
You come to the point where, God, this couldn't happen here in America.
Jerry Black was a crew member of Air Force One and a witness to the shock, mayhem, and tragedy that rocked America on November 22nd, 1963. Hear about his time working for President John F. Kennedy, both the good and the unthinkable. Also,
somebody had to do it. And if not me, who?
Phillip Blake served our country in World War II and then served his fellow veterans by reminding the rest of us all they've done. Hear him explain why he felt these often overlooked memorials are so important. Plus,
people started calling saying, will you take this one or that one? And I took them all. And it just mushroomed into something.
her big heart has made a big difference in the lives of animals. See how this former sister has become an adopted mother to scores of unwanted dogs and cats. And
money I need, but money is not everything. Sometimes you have to choose between a dollar and what's right.
He was talented enough to become a star and travel the world, but Barry Harris knew what was most important. Still, he spent his life playing music. Learn about his life coming up. Then you'll see this.
Nature's always been enticing to me. I mean, fascinating.
His love of the prairie and horses fueled Pete Hebert's passion for saddle making. See how his skill and attention to detail kept Kansas Cowboy riding high day after day. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Larry Hatteberg.
And I'm Susan Peters. Join us for those stories and more. Another half hour of Hatteberg's People starts right now.
These stories are like old friends. Their lives radiate from the screen like prophets of the past. They were teachers, but not in a classroom. Instead, they taught about life to those around them who cared to listen, and I was their student. Well, it was a moment that left our entire nation speechless and in a state of disbelief.
Those of us old enough to remember John F. Kennedy have November 22nd, 1963, etched in our minds. Jerry Black of Wichita was a crew member aboard Air Force One that day. He helped land President Kennedy alive and well in Dallas and returned him to Washington in a body bag.
If you're like me, you remember exactly what you were doing 20 years ago today when you first heard about the president. I was coming out of a restaurant and getting into my car, turned on the radio, and that's when I heard the news. But there's one Wichitan who was even closer. He had a ringside seat to history.
Just before we landed at Dallas, I had the occasion to go into the president's quarters and informing he and Mrs. Kennedy that we'd be landing in about 5 minutes.
Jerry Black worked on this nation's most exclusive airplane, Air Force One. As an Air Force sergeant, he had been assigned duty as a cabin steward. The flight he'll never forget took place November 22nd, 1963.
You come to the point where, God, this couldn't happen here in America. And especially in Dallas, which is I considered, and I always have considered, a very fine city. Fine, but right here in Dallas, Texas, that the president had been shot, it was just incomprehensible.
Black watched television as a memorial service to President Kennedy was broadcast live. It brought back many memories. Much of Black's work on Air Force One was classified, but as a crew member, he saw President Kennedy as most of us never could.
Many times he would come back. We had our own crew quarters on the aircraft, and there were many times where he would come back and his shirt sleeves rolled up and sit and talk with us or play cards, and he was just a regular guy.
All that ended in Dallas.
Texas and the nation are focused on Dallas.
All of a sudden, history changed course. In this famous news photograph, Wichitan Jerry Black was immortalized. You may not have noticed him, but he's there, a witness to history.
We prepared the aircraft for immediate takeoff at any given moment when things were, when it was ready to launch, and we had no idea what time or when, but we were prepared to fire engines and take off at a moment's notice.
This ring was given to Sergeant Black by President Kennedy during one of Black's many flights on Air Force One. Most of us have memories of a tragedy. Sergeant Jerry Black has memories of a man. This is Larry Hatteberg.
Talking to someone who was on the plane that day, I mean, it's just really an incredible feeling. And I will always remember November 22nd, 1963, because I had only been at Cake TV for 5 months. And that was a huge story that is etched in my mind, as it is many Americans who are alive on that day. It's just etched in my mind as something I will never, ever forget.
And he had a front row seat
Absolutely.
to one of the nation's greatest tragedies ever. Wow.
And in many ways, I think that's tough to live with, and I think he found it difficult to live with and difficult to have those memories. But talking to him, we learned a lot, so I was glad he was here for the story.
Thank you for bringing it to us, Larry.
My pleasure.
Well, you won't find many veterans of war who would want to relive the experience, but that doesn't mean they want it forgotten.
And it's why Phillip Blake worked so hard in the twilight of his days to make sure monuments to our veterans in Wichita don't fall victim to age and neglect. Now, with a little help from his friends and true grit, this was one veteran who made an historic difference.
I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't take a fortune for that experience.
In Wichita, it is military monuments like this one in Riverside Park that owe a debt of gratitude to Phil Blake.
I have become so acquainted with those memorials and learned the history of each of them until it's precisely like I'm visiting an old friend.
It all started when Phil saw the deterioration and the vandalism of the Bicentennial Memorial Flag Pavilion in the park along the river downtown.
And the idea of permitting a bicentennial memorial to the United States flag to fall into such dilapidated condition, to me, was just disgraceful.
That pavilion is now restored thanks to Phil, who raised the issue with former Mayor Carlos Mayans, and with the help from the city, the congressional delegation, and others, funding was secured.
Once I got immersed in it, the thought of abandoning it was just unthinkable.
Over the past few years, Phil has overseen reconstruction of many of Wichita's forgotten tributes to the past, like this one to the Spanish-American War in Riverside Park.
You'll see a number of shrapnel wounds all over the surface, and I particularly like this fella because he has his hand on his hip and he looks pretty saucy and jaunty, like he is saying, "Go ahead, make my day."
Another under Phil's watchful eye is the World War II Memorial Stone in McAdams Park.
And somebody had to do it. And if not me, who?
Who, indeed. Phil believes that saving and understanding Wichita's war memorials is so important, he's even written a book about each and every one. It's a simple story of freedom.
If it's not free, then somebody paid the price for that freedom. And the veterans are the people that paid that price. My two brothers and I all served in the South Pacific, and we all came home.
Now, Phillip lived another 5 years. He died in 2014 at age 90. And it's so good to have someone like Phillip alive and concerned with remembering what all those veterans went through. And that's why Memorial Park in Wichita is so important.
It's so important. And, you know, I never realized how important it was to remember the veterans of World War II and Pearl Harbor Day till I was telling people a week ago, we've got to remember 9/11. We've got to remember 9/11. And it's kind of the same thing. We hope those dates are never forgotten, and those wars and our veterans who served are never forgotten in those wars.
Yeah, Phillip did his best, and he did a great job.
This next story is about a woman named Pat Morris. For many of Wichita's animals, she is their only friend.
Now, Pat runs Lifeline Animal Placement and Protection, begun by accident with her own pets. Now, this former Catholic nun now ministers to barks and meows instead of hallelujahs.
You can't just walk away from this. They're here, and they're going to be here. If I walked away, a lot of these probably wouldn't make it out. Come on, Randy.
Pat Morrison and her couple of hundred dogs and cats live on a little slice of land in the far northwest part of Wichita.
Every dog has a story that's unique, Just, if they don't get home, they can stay here till their dying day.
For years, this former nun, now college professor, has taken in dogs and cats that many of you don't want.
They're going to be here, so I'll be here. And hopefully I can stay healthy, and the place doesn't fall apart, and people keep wanting to adopt them, and that'll make it worthwhile.
If she can't adopt them, she won't put them down. They will live out their life here with shelter, food, and medical attention, but it comes at a cost.
Yep, there's never enough money. If I worked 40 jobs, there wouldn't be enough money.
She has many volunteers who lend a hand, and her buildings are heated for the cats and cleaned several times a day.
We adopt about 200 cats a year. You've got to be able to give it your all. That's the trouble. You don't know that. I don't think I would have done it if I'd known, there's never a spare moment. You can't go anywhere. You can't really have any social life whatsoever. Just because we have dominion over all these animals doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to them. And that's kind of my philosophy. We've got to take care of them. Somebody does. Some days I wish it wasn't me.
She is partial to the cats. These are what she terms the old geezers, the cats who are probably too old to adopt, yet crave human companions.
They're very well-adjusted cats. They like affection, and they probably do need it. It's funny, I've been told by several veterinarians that cats are loners, and these are certainly not loners. They just are real affectionate. It's very expensive to keep this many animals and keep them housed and healthy and warm. People started calling saying, will you take this one or that one? And I took them all. And it just mushroomed into something very big. This is my calling. This is it. This is my new congregation, my own following, I guess. So this is it.
Well, you will be happy to know that Pat is still at it. In the past 25 years, she and her helpers have rescued some 6,000 dogs and cats. It's amazing.
That's incredible. Because donations are never enough, of course, Pat spends her own money to feed and take care of these animals. Her day job, by the way, is teaching philosophy at Wichita State. Oh my gosh, what a difference in two jobs,
It is,
right?
but you might say her philosophy now is also helping animals.
It is, isn't it?
And they appreciate it.
That's neat.
We're happy
Okay.
for it.
Wichita has always been a great music town. The blues community has never been large here, but for more than 70 years, it featured the great talents of Barry Harris.
Now, Barry was one of the greats in more ways than one.
It's a part of my life that has, like therapy, really,
Wichitan Barry Harris has been playing the blues for over 70 years.
But I don't know how to express myself in words. It comes out in what I play.
He's one of the old-time blues players, and he's been on the circuit for years, played everywhere.
This is not a blues town. This has been a jazz town when you were younger.
But time, like stoplights, change. Wichita has few places for blues players like Barry. One exception is this little place near Douglas and Hillside called C Major.
On Fridays and Saturdays, it's where musicians come to simply do what comes naturally. Barry has spent his life trying to make a few bucks with his music, raising a family, and simply trying to do the right thing.
The crowd is what motivates me, because it surely can't be money, because I'm not playing for money. I'm not making money. You know what I'm saying? I make change, but I'm not making any money.
At home with his granddaughter, the past seems long ago. Even though the music is timeless, people aren't. His wife, Loretta, has been seriously ill, and much of his days are now spent with her at a rest home and rehabilitation center.
It takes a good woman to stay with a musician 50 years, I guarantee you that.
It wasn't till the past few years that others discovered his music. He had a chance to travel to the East Coast and overseas to play with the big boys. He turned it down, though, to stay with his wife.
Money I need, but money is not everything. Sometimes you have to choose between a dollar and what's right.
Barry chose.
This is my baby here.
Now, Barry kept playing for several more years up until his final days. He passed away in 2020 at age 90. And when he played, he just had so much fun. You could just see it in his eyes, and he had a little hop when he played.
Yeah.
And he was just fun to watch. But you could tell he was sort of in his own world as he played.
In his own, and what a gift to Wichita. He played all over the world.
Yeah.
And then for years, he played just here.
That's right.
I love
That's right.
that.
Hey, he was a great guy.
Mm-hmm. Back in the 1800s, Kansas, as you know, was cowboy country. And those men who drove the cattle and tamed the West spent a lot of time on their horses.
And in those days, a guy like Pete Herbert would have been in high demand. And the truth is, even in the 1990s, Pete still was, because he was one of the few and one of the best.
Don't let that old dog scare you. It belongs to Pete Herbert. That's him over there, going to work.
Somehow I'm not very good at being idle. I need something to do.
In Pete Herbert's workplace, it is the smell of leather that you first notice.
Right. That's so they don't come undone. And they don't come undone when we're through with it.
Pete Herbert makes handmade saddles, and his work is from another time when the land knew no highways, only the hoofs of horses and the men who stood tall in those saddles.
Well, nature's always been enticing to me. I mean, fascinating. I like the outside. I like animals. Animals have life, and life is what it's all about.
This land was settled by men who depended on their horse and their saddles. Pete Herbert never takes a saddle for granted.
And we make them, they're completely handmade. They're not, no machine work done on it.
In Herbert's workshop, saddles line the floor just waiting to be mated to a good horse.
This has got to be done just about right, because this is the strength of the saddle.
Herbert knows a lot about saddles. He's been a farmer and a rancher, and he's been around horses all his life.
So it's got to set right on a horse, you know, that it's got to be shaped right, it's got to be formed right, and then it's got, the top has got to be formed right so it sits so the guys are comfortable, because they spend their whole day in the saddle.
In Herbert's workshop are pieces of history, saddles from another era.
This is an 1806 model. This next saddle here is a cavalry saddle, and the saddlebags that fit the back on the saddle here, here's your stamp on it.
Pete Herbert is part of the Old West. And those of us who are younger have missed this time when men rode high in the saddle and handmade leather items were common. Now Herbert is the uncommon man.
Well, this is true that it is an old-time job, and so is riding horses, but I don't know, I kind of liked that. I enjoyed that.
Well, Pete passed away 7 years later at age 83, but those saddles he made were built to last. You'll still find them for sale all across the country, those handmade saddles. When you have a saddle maker, I mean, that's not a job that's taught in college much.
Exactly.
You know, so the guys who had the skill to do it, what they left were really pieces of art. And when people find saddles like that, it's a real find.
I bet they're worth a lot of money now.
Yeah, they are.
That is great.
Yeah, good, Pete.
Now, let's tell you about that day back in 1984 when Larry got high while he was working.
All right.
And it was all on tape. What? Don't say a word.
I'm not.
Take a look.
With the increased construction in the Wichita area, tower cranes like these are becoming much more common. And if you're like me, you're real curious. Who runs those things up there, and what's it like to climb to the top to go to work every day?
John Mielek knows. He's a tower crane operator for the Law Construction Company. Every day, John climbs 18 stories straight up. No elevators, no hoist. Just 175 feet of vertical climbing just to get to work. Is it high? You betcha. But John's been doing it so long the height doesn't bother him. Now, if you're downtown and you'd like to see John work, just go to near Douglas and Maine and look up. His current project is a 9-story parking garage for the Kansas State Bank.
I may have trolleyed in a little there, so you better check me pretty close before you take the load off. This is, as long as you're busy, it's a good job.
Now understand that John is a man of few words, and that's okay. After that climb, so was I. Here, John is lifting 11,000 pounds. This crane has the capacity to lift 22,500 pounds. Units like this one cost about $500,000, but when you're working in a tight spot like downtown Wichita, they're worth the money. And the view, especially when he rotates, is great. These pictures were taken on the catwalk above where John is sitting. Now remember, when you look over the edge, don't forget to grab a hold of that railing. Crane operators are some of the biggest swingers around, but when they stop, they are the quiet guardians of a view most of us never see. We all have our mountains to climb, but climbing one every day like John Mielek just to get to work is not what most of us had in mind. This is Larry Hatteberg.
We're not sure about John, but we do know that parking garage he was building is still standing right there at Douglas and Maine.
It was the dumbest thing I've ever done.
Larry, tell the story.
The dumbest thing I've ever done.
Well, I can't believe you
they're
got
called
on a
Swedish
ladder.
cranes, and you climb up, and at that point we were like 15 or 20 stories in the air, and I'm climbing up this little ladder to get up to where he was working. I was terrified, and I have a fear of heights.
And the camera was on your back?
I had the camera strapped so I could have both hands and feet, of course, to climb up. I was terrified. I mean, it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I would never do it again, nor would I recommend anybody doing it again.
I'm sorry, I agree with you. That was a very dumb thing to do.
So, but when people, when you say Larry got high, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood what you were talking about.
Well, you had to have been high to climb that ladder. I mean, that's
I would
for
have
darn
to be
sure.
high again to climb that ladder. Okay.
That's a wrap for this week. If you have a question or comment, please send us an email. HattebergsPeople@kpts.org is the address. We read them all, and we love hearing from you. Until we see you again, be safe and be happy. I'm Susan Peters.
And I'm Larry Hatteberg. It was great to have you with us. We'll see you again soon.